Prison guards slash officers, has there ever been a time where you believed an inmate was truly innocent? What made you believe so? I was a correctional officer for 5 years. The closest I know of someone actually being innocent was the case of the 3 strikes law. Basically, upon being found guilty of a 3rd felony, you're hit with a much stiffer penalty. He was a bouncer at a bar and broke up a fight. Steps outside with the doorman, and there happens to be a news reporter there, reporting about the nightlife, and they ask for an interview. He said no thank you. Cameraman keeps filming and is asked to stop. He gets all high and mighty on his freedom of the press speech and shoves the camera in the bouncer's face, saying that he can't do anything about him filming. Natural reaction, bouncer palms the camera lens and pushes the cameraman away. Now, he did it with some force, but by no means with any malicious intent. Viewfinder hits the cameraman above the eye and cuts his forehead. He immediately screams, causing the 2 police officers on the other side of the road to come running over. One officer ends up recognizing the bouncer from previous charges and arrests him for malicious wounding, a felony. This is the bouncer's 3rd felony and therefore is immediately sent to prison upon being found guilty. Did an extra 10 years for the 3 strikes law. If anyone else had done the same thing, I feel like the responding officers wouldn't have arrested them. Next story. 19-year-old kid at my facility was sentenced to 10 years for manslaughter and DUI. The kid was 17 at the time of the accident, swerved to miss a deer, lost control and ended up hitting a tree. Killed his girlfriend who was in the passenger seat. Kid blows a .02 on the breathalyzer. Not impaired whatsoever, but he was under the age of 21, the legal drinking age, and was still given a DUI, which led to the manslaughter charge. I guess this is just one more of an example of the effed up system in place. The girl's family visited him every weekend until he was transferred. Yeah, that's just absolute nightmare scenario. Not only do you wreck your car, but you're responsible for the passing of somebody else. I can't even imagine the guilt that he's living with, and hopefully he got the help that he needs and is doing better. Next story. Was a guard a few years ago. Had an inmate who was in for a parole violation. Why he received his PV was he was on his way to it, got in a bad car wreck, and broke his collarbone and 2 ribs. Hospital wouldn't let him leave to go to his parole officer. Hospital tried calling to get him out this time, but his parole officer said, too bad. If he does not show up today, he'll go back to jail. Needless to say, 3 days later, he walks out of the hospital to be immediately arrested and put in jail. Next story. This guy is totally innocent, still locked up too. I also encountered 2 other inmates who were exonerated. One guy had been found guilty of SA at a bench trial, even though his DNA did not match the perpetrators. Let that sink in. A judge found a man guilty of SA, even though it was not his semen on the victim. The other guy was accused of a SA a year after it happened. The victim had made false accusations in 2 other states, but the prosecutor either failed to investigate her or ignored this fact. Possibly the worst case I ever saw involved a man whose daughter was SA'd at her daycare. The perpetrator, the husband of the lady who ran the daycare, had SA'd several children there. After the trial, the daycare owner claimed that the father of one of the victims had SA'd her child several years earlier. The cops asked him to come down to the station to talk about it. Having done nothing wrong, he agreed. After talking to him for hours, the police nevertheless believed they had a case against him. He was arrested, could not make bail, and sat in jail for a year. He intended to go to trial, but on the day of the trial, the prosecutor offered him a deal. Plead guilty, get time served, go home that day. He agreed, pled guilty, got 4 years. Working in a prison gave me a front row seat to the awfulness of the criminal justice system. Most people in prison really were career criminals and very bad people, but their wrongful convictions were horrifying. I'll never agree to talk to the police under any circumstances, and I have no faith in the benevolence of prosecutors or judges. Next story. Actually, all the time. Remand times are a big concern. Sometimes people can wait in jail for a year waiting for trial and sentencing to be finished. Especially if there are witness testimonies to arrange, victim impacts, pre-sentence reports, etc. If you've already got a lengthy criminal record to the extent you'd be denied bail, which is common, it's in your best interest to plead guilty for minor crimes whether you did it or not. You could sit in jail for a year proving you didn't make that threatening phone call, or you could just plead out and be home in 3 to 6 months, because if you sat there a year, you'd likely be sentenced to 6 months time served. observed. Next story. Correctional officer here. I work in bookings, so I see them when they come in and when they go out. I also do all their paperwork and read the criminal complaints the officers file before arraignments. I've seen people get pretty lenient charges, and a few get something more harsh than I would have charged them with, but I've yet to see someone come into my jail that wasn't guilty of something. Examples. We have a 19-year-old female come in a couple weeks on a T-47 hold, which is a non-criminal 12-hour sleep-off. Yet she's under the drinking age, and rarely does the officer ever charge her with a minor consuming, let alone a minor consuming habitual. I've watched her kick numerous officers as well, yet she never gets assault 3 or assault 4 in an LEO. I also have an old man who was 74 and no priors come in on an assault for domestic violence, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest, all because he got emotional and pushed his stepson at his wife's funeral, stepson's mother, and then made a scene and refused to leave when the cops showed up to arrest him after the stepson called the cops on him midway through the service. Stepson was a regular in our facility for theft and apparently told the old man that essentially he was happy she passed so that he could get her stuff. He was guilty of the assault 4, but a little tact and compassion would have gone a long ways to avoid the other charges from taking place. Edit. A brain-fed me son-in-law. Proper term was stepson. Next story. CO here. I've never seen someone that I believe to be innocent, but I have seen guys come in that were what I feel to be unfairly imprisoned. We had one guy who was a normal blue-collar type who missed a child support payment. Then his lawyer didn't tell him about an upcoming court appointment, and he was given 30 days in jail. The lawyer admitted to not telling him, but the judge wasn't having any of it. Edit. I just thought of another guy. One guy in my institution is in his late 60s and has a sparkling clean record, but on manufacturing of substance charges. His son has had several charges in the same thing before, so we all think that he took the charge to keep his son from doing time. Not saying that this is right or wrong, but what a dad thing to do, to just take the heat for your son's poor decisions. I think, if anything, that should be a wake-up call for the son to pull it together, because you don't want dad taking the heat for that. Next story. As an ex-officer, it's difficult to believe anyone in prison. The inmates that you don't want to believe did it will usually admit it to you. The inmates that lie all the time will blame it on someone else. Well, Boogie was out with money, and Shanti didn't like Boogie. Money killed Boogie, and I took the rap for it. You hear crap like that all day. However, there was one inmate who was in for over 20 years with a life sentence that was released after new evidence showed he really didn't do it. He's now writing a book and attempting to sue the state. Next story. Correctional officer here. It doesn't matter if they're guilty or not. My job isn't to punish or pass judgment on the inmate. My job is to keep them safe and keep the public safe. I personally have several inmates that I don't think should be in prison, but I wasn't there when they made the mistake to get themselves locked up in the first place. Some of the nicest, most pleasant inmates to deal with are lifers, life sentence inmates, because they have come to grips with their situation and the fact that their actions put them there. Edit. I'll share a story about an inmate that everyone I talked to felt was wrongly incarcerated. I worked with this one inmate, an older black gentleman who we'll call Mr. Grass. Allegedly, Mr. Grass owned a lawnmower repair shop that was well respected in the community. One day, some guys bring in some lawnmowers to sell, and Mr. Grass purchased them for a fair price. What these fine young lads neglected to mention is these lawnmowers were stolen. Mr. Grass is arrested, pleads guilty, and is sentenced to quite a few years. Next story. I worked for a year at a state prison as a correction officer. Honestly, if you're talking to an inmate long enough to get that much information from them about their case in life, you're probably flirting with overfamiliarity, as they call it. It's where you let your guard down by starting to become emotionally involved with someone or their situation and command staff at prisons to keep an eye out for this person all the time, especially with female staff at a male prison. I've seen or heard many correctional officers losing their jobs due to bringing contraband for prisoners, or hell, even getting sexually involved with inmates. This usually happens more with female COs and male prisoners. all because they started feeling bad for the person or became too close. The criminal justice system is not perfect by any means, but the appeals process is there for these types of people. Next story. Did a tour of detainee operations in Iraq. We held local nationals for various reasons. As part of my job, I had access to the records that described the nature of their arrest. Some of them were actual crapheads, attacks on coalition forces and the like, but some of them had no business being locked up, let alone locked up for 5+ years. Some of them just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. Others had crossed some of the coalition-backed local governors and had been locked up on their word alone. Take it for what it's worth, but one guy told me that he had slept with an official's daughter and had spent 4 years there because the official made up a story about him helping out Al-Qaeda. He could have been lying, but his record was pretty suspect. Next story. So, I worked as a sheriff's deputy. I worked the jail, 1,000+ inmates, many of them frequent flyers. We used to often joke when we'd release one of them. We'll have the light on for you. Anyways, one guy in a dorm asked me to check a date in the log. I asked why, and he says, "Sarge, you mind telling me if I was here that day?" Okay, I do. He's logged in the dorm that day. He never left the dorm that day. Not once. "Sarge, can my lawyer get a copy of that?" I'm not a lawyer, but sure, he should be able to subpoena that. Why? That day I asked about, over 2 years ago, by the way, I was in here for fighting. I know, you have anger issues. You fight with people. I'm here now for SA. That's not you, dude. You've got a girl, and you love her. She visits every week. Yeah, this other chick, she says I SA'd her on that date. Seriously? Dude, you've been here on this stint for almost a year. Why don't you bail out? Hey, it's not a big deal to be in, and I'll get paid when they figure out I was wrongly accused. To steal a Britishism, I was gobsmacked. He chose to stay in jail so he could get paid for it. Weird. Next story. Correctional officer here, 4 years. I've seen charges get dropped. I've seen people found not guilty, and people who were in that didn't really need to be in jail. But I never believe innocent stories. Inmates in general spend 24 hours a day trying to play the victim to further their own agenda. General rule for COs. Don't believe 95% of what you hear, and 75% of what you see. Are some probably innocent? Yeah, but that's not for me to decide. Next story. Correctional officer for 12 years. I have 2 stories. The first is not technically innocent, but annoys me to no end. This guy went to a party and was 21 at the time. He met 2 girls who claimed to be 18 and 19 years old and ended up having sex with both of them. Turns out they are actually 15 and 16, respectively. Both girls' parents find out and are furious, so they notify law enforcement and file charges against him. During the court proceedings, the girls admit they lied to this guy about their age. They were the ones who initiated the sexual encounter. He's found guilty and is now a registered sex offender. This one, I believe the guy is innocent. He was a financial advisor for a big-name company, so he had his crap together. Black guy, nice car. He was giving a friend a ride, and it turns out his friend was selling drugs. The driver had no idea his friend was selling drugs. Long story short, the guy gets pulled over for a traffic violation, and the drugs are found on his friend in multiple baggies ready for distribution. He gets hit with a felony for transporting the dealer. Before you all bullcrap on these stories and say these guys are lying, I'm able to look up all the information on these guys all the way back to the initial police report. Yeah, this just sounds like bad luck, bad fortune, unfortunate collateral damage from other people's silly decisions, but that's the way the world turns. Next story. This is a long story, but I'll keep it short. I worked in a county jail for a few years at the start of my career in law enforcement. There was a 19-year-old kid in there that was one of the nicest, most respectful people you'd ever meet. Basically, he had to serve an entire year with us because his ex-girlfriend and her family lied about something involving sex, and he ended up in jail on the sex offender list. He waited an entire year of his youth in jail and was plastered on the sex offender list. Shortly after he got out, he went through an appeal process and took a polygraph and was found innocent. He was removed from the sex offender registry, but he still had wasted a year of his life in jail for something he didn't do. That really pissed me off, and I can only imagine how he felt about it, but it is what it is. I saw him a few months after, and he was doing much better and said he got a good job. I kindly and professionally advised him he stay away from the crazy-ass female dogs. He laughed and told me he learned his lesson. Next story. I'm a CEO at a prison in the South. There's a young man doing 15 years currently who claims he was framed, and I believe him. He's been there for 6 years now. He used to have a huge drug problem, pills and heroin, and all his life he struggled with his speech abilities. Really bad stutter. Since getting to prison and being sober and working with doctors at the facility, his stutter has gotten better, but it's still very much a struggle. What happened was, he was high as crap, and his buddies took him to rob a couple houses, then left him at one of the houses and called the police. The man stepped outside after becoming more coherent and was suddenly surrounded by police. Nothing was stolen from the house he was found at, but police found stolen property from 4 other houses in his garage about 15 miles away. So the police charged him with a total of 5 burglaries that occurred in the area over the course of 2 weeks. He says he took the fall for it out of fear nobody would understand him, and that he was so high he doesn't remember he even did anything wrong. He took the blame out of loyalty and fear that if he didn't, he would get killed. He quietly does his time, believing that there's obviously a sign from God that he needed to be punished for something, and that if he didn't end up there, he knows he'd probably be dead by now. Next story. Guy who was sentenced to 10 years for possession of medical marijuana from another state while vacationing at a lake in AZ. Got arrested for possession with intent to distribute, since they were rolled into individual joints inside his prescription bottle. Another was a Marine who killed a guy who was beating up someone else at a bar. They said his training meant that any use of force on his part was excessive, and was convicted of second-degree murder. Worst was probably the 18-year-old kid who was convicted of second-degree murder, with the weapon used listed as car. He was a passenger of a car who hit and ran someone. The cops caught up with them, and he was sentenced because they ruled that he should have done something about it as they drove away. Corrections officer, 5 years. Edit. Also, I had a friend who was Mormon, and when he turned 18, was having a moral conflict because his girlfriend was still only 17, despite the fact that they had been dating for 3 years. He talked to his Mormon bishop about it, and the bishop called the cops and said he was a predator and was essaying a minor. He ended up doing 4 years in prison and lifetime parole / registered sex offender for life. Next story. Current CO here. I know of one guy who's innocent on a SA charge. The girl set him up big time and even admitted it after he was given 8 years. She was laughing about it, in fact. They were having some kinky sex and using a few toys along with rope. She had bruises, rope marks, and crap all over here. Went to the police an hour after he left and said she was SA'd. He tied her up, abused her, etc. When he was being interviewed, he was laughing. He thought it was a joke because it's something they both agreed on. As it got more and more serious and court dates were set, DNA was taken, etc., he couldn't believe it. Dude got 8 years and can't handle it inside. Want to know what's worse? She's tried to visit him numerous times. Next story. I was in corrections for 9 years, used the downtime on night shifts and evening shifts to earn my law enforcement degree. I had nobody come through that was innocent. A handful would claim innocence, but then you look at the criminal complaint in their file. Joe Schmo drove by his ex-wife's home 4 times within 2 minutes after sending her 12 texts. An active HRO is in place, so Schmo was arrested. Or, John Douche claimed his car was in the ditch because his friend was driving it. There was too much junk in the passenger seat area for someone to sit. Also, the passenger airbag was not deployed after the crash, only the driver's side. John Douche was arrested for DWI. Or, the gun went off by accident, then I dropped it. 5 times. Source: corrections in an 18 by 24 mile extremely rural county of 25,000 people. Next story. Well, this is probably going to get buried, but I think it's my duty to share this story. Not a prison guard here, but I worked with a guy who was arrested for almost a month, accused of SAing his 8-year-old stepdaughter and his 6-year-old son. Police handcuffed him in front of everybody that was working with him. His face was shown on TV and everything. While he was in jail, I heard stories about him, about how he used to stare at the kids playing near where we worked, etc. Well, as it turned out, he was innocent. The only reason he was in jail for so long without any evidence was because the one accusing him was his wife, and she had a brother who's a cop. He made sure to keep him arrested as long as he could, using his influence. Also, the chief officer was a woman, and I think she was kind of predetermined to think he was guilty. Anyway, he shared his cell with a bunch of really dangerous people, but early on, the inmates thought he was innocent and told him not to worry, that nobody would hurt him. After he got out of jail, he sued the TV channels, got a better job that pays him more, and nobody knows about his past. And the last time I heard about him, he was fighting for the custody of the kids. I hope he wins, because I can't imagine the kids living with that horrible mother. Yeah, I'm going to double down. I hope he wins as well. When you're set up like this wrongfully and unjustly, I think ultimately you deserve only the best after going through what he had to go through. Just saying. Next story. I work at a prison. There's one man who is truly innocent. It's not just me saying this, but all evidence and witness statements prove when I looked up his case on the CDC. He let his roommate borrow his car, and his roommate went on to kill 2 people while driving his car. He had no knowledge of the event until he was arrested. He's serving 10 years for assistance with a felony. Edit. That being said, it's not my place to help him or anyone else out while they're in prison. My role is to make sure that all inmates serve their time, not to add or take away any punishment that the system has deemed appropriate. Is the system itself unjust? I'll leave you with a question. How is it that a child predator can get 3 years for his punishment, but a man who's in possession of crack get 10? Next story. I work in a supermax for 7 years or so. I never questioned their guilt, but I often wondered if the right sentence was imposed. I also wondered about the fairness of the judicial system. My state is about 30% black, 55% white, and 15% other. The prison was about 80% black, 10% white, 10% others. When I got to know the inmates, I found that the white ones all had one thing in common: poverty. Very few inmates were rich kids. I also felt sorry for the mentally ill inmates. There were quite a few that had no business being incarcerated in prison. I'm not saying they should be the general public, but they were better off in an institution for the mentally ill, where they could be better cared for and where they are less likely to be preyed on by other cohabitants. Next story. Little late to the party here. I've worked corrections for 3+ years. There is a pretty high-profile case where 4 guys burned down the owner of a gas station's house so he could be forced to move all of his liquidized money into a store. They then robbed the store and killed the cash register and a delivery man for no reason. During all of this, one of the guys has a cousin who calls him around the time of the offense. Because Texas, anyone who's involved in capital murder, even if they don't pull the trigger, can be charged the same. Okay, so let's look at the cousin who got roped into this. Guy is a professional bodybuilder, makes cover of magazines, has a wife, and makes good money. Bodybuilder's cousin, who's involved in the crime, is a low-life thug. They accuse the bodybuilder of being the getaway driver. What I failed to mention is the amount of money they stole was around $10K, so about $2K per person. Why would a bodybuilder risk everything in his life for $2,000? Never made sense to me. That's the best I've got. Next story. Not really. I don't really concern myself with their innocence or guilt. It wouldn't really change anything if I thought they were innocent. They were put in prison by a court, and if that was wrong, it needs to be changed by the court. I've encountered people who totally deserve to be where they're at for what they've done, but you can tell that society just totally failed them. Lack of good parenting, lack of education, and lack of opportunity can combine to really F someone over. It may sound odd, but I don't really feel sympathy for them as adults, but rather for the child they once were and the life they could have had if they were given a decent lot in life. Next story. Way late to this party. In 2006, I was deployed to Ramadi, Iraq, and we were holding a man in the Iraqi police station cell. Turns out that the only evidence against him was a sealed, undeveloped, unused roll of Kodak film. The rumor was the police chief raided his house when the prisoner failed to provide protection money. The Shia forces that we set up over there were monsters and acted like a mafioso entity. I felt bad for the guy, but could do nothing past report it. He was executed after we left. Next story. Not necessarily innocent, but I worked as a corrections officer for about a year. During my rounds one day, 2 inmates stopped me and asked for me to explain something to them. Inmate A was there on a 3-year sentence for marijuana possession and distribution. He told me he had 3 plants in his dad's shed and he got caught. Inmate B was new and said he got 6 to 9 months for torturing and killing 14 cats. They asked me to explain how that was justice. I told them I thought it was effed up and went to my office later on to check their stories. Turns out they were both true stories, and inmate B's father is a wealthy, well-connected guy in the federal government. I was kinda stunned. Next story. There's an infamous murder case in India known as Arushi Talwar murder case. Basically, the parents are convicted of killing their own daughter because, according to the case the police built up, was that the father killed the 13-year-old daughter after he found her having sex with their housemaid, who was 45 years old, and then proceeded to kill the housemaid too. In reality, there were no evidences against them whatsoever because the police had lost all the evidences in the first few days of the crime. In reality, the housemaid had roommates who would frequently break into their house and drink the father's wine and fancied the girl, Arushi. One night, she saw them and panicked and slit her throat, and then they proceeded to kill the housemaid, fearing he might speak of the act. There's a really good movie called The Talvars, which came out this year. Shows how effing flawed and corrupt the justice system of India is. I feel really bad for the poor parents. Next story. Crappy application of the law here. Co-worker's son shot a BB gun into the air, and the .17mm metal BB on its way down punctured a plastic roof awning. The judge charged him with intentionally discharging a weapon. BB guns are considered deadly weapons in that township, and property destruction. He got 1.5 years probation, was expelled from school since it was a gun charge, and now is trying to get his GED. Before this, he probably had a ticket into any university in the state of Texas. Next story. Man from a wealthy family has his garage broken into. His garage is attached to his home. He grabs his shotgun and goes to investigate, only to find a man high on cocaine has broken into his garage, and subsequently his vehicle when the man comes after him. He fires one shot, 9 years for manslaughter. In case you're curious, yes, he served all 9 years. Next story. I work in a max prison, not an officer, but a counselor, and I would estimate that maybe 2% of them are innocent of the crime they were convicted of. However, the overwhelming majority of them, at least in state of incarceration, are guilty. Not only that, the overwhelming majority of them have done a lot of hurtful things that they haven't got caught for. If you live right and live responsibly and don't take drugs, and have a bit of consideration for your fellow man, your chances of going to prison in America are next to nil. Most of our guilty inmates will give you some victim sob story, then stab you in the back when you turn around. Almost all of the inmates I've worked with either falsely think of themselves as victims or simply don't care about who they hurt.